Welcome, everyone. It's really nice to see people, and it's really nice to connect with our CPP community. Just a couple of housekeeping things. You are going to be on mute. I would love it if we could all talk, but it would be chaos with this many people. So if you do want to put anything in the chat, please go ahead and do that. That would be great. And you're going to be asked in a little while, you're going to be asked to participate doing some polls. So we'll also be interacting in that way. I want to thank you guys for being a part of the call. And really thank you for all the work that you're doing with children and families. Also, I want to thank the Harris Foundation because they're the ones that funded me doing this training. This started out, the plan was to have a very small virtual meeting just for some people in Chicago, and it ended up being a big party. So it's very nice to be joined by so many people. So thanks to the Harris Foundation for that. Also, thanks to Chandra and Brooke and Anne in San Francisco for helping getting this ready in terms of letting everybody know. And thanks to Chandra for letting us use her Zoom and for being the IT help desk with me this morning. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to meet all of you individually, but my name is Tina Dorow. I am a CPP trainer and a CPP clinician in Chicago. I'm also a social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've got a lot of different jobs, but I would say that one of my main jobs, in addition to being a CPP trainer, is I do CPP work with families, some in the foster care system, but also some who have been exposed to community violence here in Chicago. So not all, but a lot of the families I work with have been victims of or exposed to some type of gun violence. So that's a big part of what I do. You're gonna probably see me glancing over to the left a little bit, my left. I have notes, so just so you know, that's what I'm doing. The other thing I want to get to next is just a really brief agenda of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk for a little bit. We're going to have you guys reflect on your own professional development. We're going to talk about CPP fidelity briefly, and then we're going to try to use the fidelity tools to guide our work. So we're going to use some case examples to think about CPP fidelity. I decided to offer this training in response to the many changes that the families that I work with are having, and I'm sure the families you work with are having due to COVID-19, also the stay-at-home orders, transitioning to telehealth. There's a lot happening all at once, and I thought it might be useful for us to get together and talk about that. In the work I do, I kind of hear a lot of people say, am I doing CPP? Is this right? Is this the right thing to do? And I heard that before COVID-19, but I hear it a lot more now. So I'm hoping that this training is going to help us kind of get back to what we already know about CPP as we move forward in kind of very uncharted territory. So the agenda for the hour is, again, professional development, talk about that. Talk about fidelity, and then give some case examples. So next, also, I am not a great Zoom master, so I appreciate your patience, but we're gonna get through this. And we're gonna have all the right slides. So I want us to take a minute. You're not gonna be able to respond a lot, maybe in the chat, but I want you guys to think about your development as a CPP practitioner. So we're going to use this slide that Chandra has, this kind of self-assessment tool. And I want you guys to just take a minute and reflect on your own professional development in regards to this tool. So think about what are your strengths and challenges in regards to CPP competencies and foundational knowledge, and kind of where you would assess yourself. Again, we can't really have a conversation about it, but I just want you guys to take a minute and look at this and kind of think about where you're at. So I'm gonna let you guys look at that slide for a second. And just kind of think about that, think about where you are. And then I want you to kind of think about your adherence to CPP fidelity. So how do you use the fidelity tools? How do the tools guide your practice? How do you use them in supervision, whether you're a supervisor or a supervisee? Now, I will say for myself, as this pandemic has started, I tend to focus on other things besides the fidelity tools. So I feel like going back to them has been a really useful reminder to me about what I know and what I need to learn more about in CPP. So the next thing I want us to think about is our interest in being a CPP practitioner, our desire to be a practitioner. Some people came to this model and really embraced it and really sought it out. Other people may have stumbled upon CPP and they're like, oh, this is pretty cool. I like using this. And some people may have really come to the model kicking and screaming, like, I don't want to do this. I don't know what this is. This is very different. But I'm hoping that everyone on this call has at least some interest in CPP, and hopefully some of you, hopefully a lot of you, have a real passion for the model and for working with families using the model. And this last bullet point, I want us to kind of think about the setting that we're in and the population with whom we're working. So do you have supervisors and colleagues? Do you have trainers? Do you have mentors that are helping you, supporting you with CPP? People who can praise the work you're doing, or people who can point out where you might be struggling. And then think about the communities that you're in, the communities that you work with. Whether you do home-based or office-based, are you familiar with those communities? Do you feel comfortable in them? Do you enjoy the families that you work with? I'm going to say for myself, I do home-based work, and I work on the south and west sides of Chicago, and I love the communities that I work in. There's a lot of struggles, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of disparity, but I do really love the community and I feel very comfortable in those communities. I also love my colleagues. I feel very privileged to have mentors and coworkers and teachers that I can really rely on in terms of my CPP work. So again, kind of think about where you're at in terms of your CPP development. And now I want us to think about our professional development in terms of telehealth and working in a pandemic. So in regards to competencies and foundational knowledge, the training today is not going to include all the things you need to know about doing telehealth in a pandemic. I'm sure a lot of you have gotten a lot of emails, gotten links to webinars, gotten all kinds of information about doing telehealth. And I really encourage you to use those tools, to go to those webinars, to click on those links, and because you can really learn a lot. I learned a lot. But I do want to highlight, so you're not going to learn about telehealth in this training, but I do want to highlight some things in terms of we're applying CPP core competencies to telehealth, but there are also some extra things I think that we need to think about. And safety is a big one that stands out for me. Safety is a focus of CPP treatment, but with telehealth, we're kind of we have to find new ways to establish safety. So that might be who's included in our telehealth sessions, who's present, are families safe? Do they have privacy? Do they feel comfortable sharing? Do they feel comfortable sharing where they are and what they're doing? Safety can also include, for a lot of our families, because we're working in a pandemic, a lack of resources. They may have problems maintaining housing or employment or childcare. And these are ongoing issues for most of the families that I work with, and probably yours too, but things can really be ramped up during this virus and stay-at-home orders. Some of the safety issues might also be family members who may be ill, or community members who may be ill. People may still be working or using childcare, taking public transportation. So they're exposing themselves to a lot of risk on a day-to-day basis, which may kind of mess with their sense of safety. When families are worried and scared about those things, they're often going to be triggered to previous losses, previous lapses in safety. I'm thinking of biological families I work with who aren't able to see their kids in person because of the stay-at-home order. So they might be triggered to remember when their kids were first taken away from them. You may have family members remembering or being triggered about previous family members who have died, or who have been involved in different kinds of healthcare institutions that may or may not have treated them well, or that they may or may not have been able to survive that treatment. You may also be encountering families who are experiencing a lot of discrimination, or are being treated in an unfair way. In Chicago, the majority of people who are getting sick and who are dying are people who are African American or Latinx. And so those people are really suffering in a way that other people are not. And that can trigger other experiences of being mistreated or discriminated against. So those are things in terms of our core competency about telehealth in a pandemic that we need to really be thinking about. But families are also experiencing additional loss of you as a therapist. You may be doing telehealth, but you're not in person with them. And that can feel like a real loss. Children can feel like, hey, I get to see you on this video, or I get to talk to you on the phone, but we don't get to play with the toys like we used to play with them. They can really miss being with you and really miss that safe space that you created for them. In terms of foundational knowledge, in terms of telehealth, again, I'm not going to tell you how to do telehealth. You're not going to learn about telehealth in this training. But a lot of us didn't do telehealth before the pandemic. So we're really having to get caught up on how to do that. We're having to learn about new HIPAA, or we're having to think about HIPAA in a different way. We're having to think about ethics. We're having to think about the technology that we're using that we didn't have to learn or didn't have to use before. And learning new skills is not a bad thing, but we've really had to learn it, in my opinion, in a frightening way. It's been sort of thrust upon us, and nobody was really thinking that they were going to have to do this, or a lot of people, I would say. And so it can feel like we're really behind, like we're slow moving in getting things going. So I think those are things that are also kind of shaking our professional development in terms of doing telehealth. In terms of our adherence to fidelity, we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, so I won't go into that. In terms of the settings and the kind of support in the populations that we're working with, that's going to vary regarding telehealth. But I would say I work for a lot of different agencies, and I would say that a lot of people, a lot of agencies were kind of blindsided by having to do telehealth. And there's been a real mix of how people have handled it. And it can kind of feel like you're on your own. Do I do Zoom? Do I do Doxy? Do I do FaceTime? What do I do? How do I do it? And we're not always feeling like we're getting support from our agencies and how to figure that out. I'll say for myself that I work with a lot of social workers and a lot of not tech savvy social workers. So we are all feeling a bit lost. So our sense of support and competency during using telehealth has not been really great. But we're working on it. So I just want to say that our professional development levels are really going to vary. Some of us may feel pretty competent as CPP practitioners, but as telehealth professionals, we may not feel very confident. We may kind of be feeling like we're starting over. And for some people, it may be that you're just learning CPP and you're having to learn how to do telehealth in a pandemic. So you may also feel brand new at so many things. And I just want to kind of point out that that is part of this. It's not that you should be competent or feel competent as a practitioner of CPP and telehealth all at once. We're going to have to sort of catch up a little bit. And hopefully that's what we'll talk a little bit more. You're not alone in that regard. So we're going to talk a little bit, if I can find my cursor, here we go. We're going to talk about CPP fidelity and how it can guide us. So many of you guys have seen this slide and heard Chandra and other trainers talk about fidelity as a chocolate cake is kind of a metaphor for CPP fidelity. If you want to make a really good chocolate cake, you have to pay attention to the details, like the recipe, the ingredients, the baking technique. And you also think about the love and the care that you put into making the chocolate cake, right? To do really good CPP treatment, we have trainers, we have supervisors, we have mentors who can show us and teach us how to do the model. We also have the tools, the CPP fidelity tools, which are really like a recipe for how to do CPP. And now that we're doing telehealth in the pandemic, it can kind of feel like some of our ingredients for the chocolate cake are new or different. We've got COVID to deal with and all the losses and the different sense of safety that kind of go with it. So those are some new ingredients. And we may also kind of feel like we have a new oven that we are cooking our cake in or baking our cake in. There's all kinds of devices that we're using different platforms, using our computers, using our telephones, using Zoom, using Google Duo, using FaceTime, using all those different things. And that can feel like a different oven that we're baking in. But what I want to say, or what I think, is that CPP fidelity is still our original recipe. We still have the same recipe. We may have to make some tweaks to accommodate the new ingredients and the new oven, but we still have that recipe to rely on. So this is a new fidelity compass. This is a fairly new kind of way it's presented that Chandra worked on. And so these are the CPP strands of fidelity. And I'm not going to go into them in great detail, but I just want to kind of go over them briefly. So in terms of reflective practice fidelity, that's really how we're feeling about being with the family. How do our feelings affect our perceptions and our interventions with families? Emotional process fidelity is how family members are feeling, how we're responding to their emotional states. We have dyadic relational fidelity, which is how you're holding both the caregiver and the child, and how you're intervening in ways to keep them connected. Trauma framework fidelity is how does the family's trauma history affect them, and how does it affect our responses to the family. We also look at content fidelity, which is our understanding of treatment, our conceptualization of treatment for this family. What are the goals? What are the ports of entry? How and where are we intervening? And then finally, we have procedural fidelity, which is, are we following the CPP procedures in each phase of treatment, and why or why not? So again, that's a very brief overview. I want to pause. Let me go back. I want to pause for a minute. I know we can't really open it up to like a bazillion questions, but I guess I want to look at the chat for a sec and see if this is making sense to people. Even if you give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that would be cool too. I see some thumbs up. Okay. Okay, yes, I see some yeses. Good. Okay. Excellent. Okay. I guess if you said no, I'm not sure what I would do, but we're just going to keep going. Okay. Um, so I'm going to move us to talking about some cases because I really feel like case material to me is the way to think about how to apply fidelity. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 4 case examples. I think we'll have time for all 4 of them. And what we're going to do is we're going to read the case. I'll read it out loud. I know you can read, but I'm going to read it out loud. And then I'm going to ask for your feedback about the case. We'll do a poll. And then we're going to talk, then I'm going to talk some more. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can apply fidelity to the example. And I'm going to give you a warning that it's going to be more wondering than solid answers, yes or no. This is CPP. Because I really want to stress that there's not usually one answer. There's not usually like, this is the CPP way to do it, right? We're using this fidelity tool, the fidelity tools to help us think about it, but there's not one way to do it. And especially because every family is different. And so when someone asks me, am I doing it? Is this CPP? Am I doing it right? I sometimes ask the question back to them because that's a trick. To ask people, well, why do you think it's CPP? Or why do you not think it's CPP? And that's kind of what I want us to do with these case examples. And hopefully we will achieve that. So we are going to move on to the first case example. So you, okay, wait a second. I'm going to move you guys. Okay, yeah. You are in the core intervention phase of treatment. When I say you, that's you, the therapist. You are in the core intervention phase of treatment with a mother and her 3-year-old daughter. The 3-year-old's father died 6 months ago. Mother and daughter struggle to talk directly about the father's death. In sessions, the daughter frequently initiates playing hide and seek with the mother. Since sheltering in place began, the mother asked to have weekly phone calls with you for support. The mother uses those calls to express sadness about her child's father being gone and how media reports about COVID-19 make her worry that she will get sick and die herself, leaving her daughter an orphan. Mother says her daughter is more clingy than usual and does not want to be away from her mother. You suggest video calls with the mother and the daughter, but the mother worries that the child won't sit still long enough for the video. So you agree to continue the calls with the mother. Okay, so now we are going to do a poll. So you guys should see a poll. I want you, or I think you're going to see a poll in a minute. It's going to ask you, is this CPP? Is this therapist doing CPP? And you can answer yes, no, or maybe. Okay, so I'm going to launch this poll. Do you guys see it? And you're answering. Okay. Whew. So far, so good. Okay. Ooh, lots of answering. Love it. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. Okay. And then I'm going to share the results with you. I have to say all my tasks out loud. It helps me do them. Okay. So it sounds like most of you feel like this is CPP. Few people said no, and some people said maybe. All right. So let's talk about that for a second. Again, I know we can't have a dialogue about it, but I'm going to kind of use the tools to talk about why this may or may not be CPP. All right. So I'm going to start with reflective practice fidelity because I feel like that's the easiest place to start for me because I can think about my own feelings all day long. So I'm going to think about for reflective practice fidelity, I'm going to really think about as a therapist, why do I want to move to these video sessions? Why do I want them both in the room? It may be for me that talking to mom by herself doesn't feel like CPP. And maybe that's some of the people that said no, maybe that's what they were thinking too. Um, so in order for me, for it to be CPP, I may feel like I got to meet with mom and this kiddo together. That's the rule. But collateral sessions are really part of CPP. So I would think that maybe I would think about how do these individual phone calls with mom, how could they be helpful in addressing whatever goals we might have? But I gotta say, if I was the therapist, I may, if I'm talking to mom on the phone and I'm really wanting to do dyadic sessions, it might be really hard for me to be present with this mom. I might be thinking about how I could convince her to do dyadic sessions, or how I could get her on board, how I could get her thinking like I'm thinking that we need to really do these dyadic sessions. And then I may not really be hearing mom and hearing her concerns. I guess I might ask the question a different way if I was using reflective practice fidelity. I might think about not how I could convince mom to do the dyadic sessions, but why it's important for her to continue with these individual phone calls. Why is that important to her? How is that helpful for her? Because if I get really caught up in we gotta have dyadic sessions to do CPP, I might miss that. I might also need to consider the family's capacity to do video sessions in terms of the technology or privacy or safety. And I might also want to think about what it's like to be in the individual sessions with mom. For me, is mom making me really sad? Is mom really bumming me out because she's so sad about the child's dad dying? Does this feel out of my area of expertise? I'm not a grief counselor. I don't know how to help her with that. Maybe I'm not supposed to do it this way. And do the phone calls feel too much like individual therapy? So I might be thinking about all those things. Some other therapists who maybe really don't like video may think, I'm going to keep on these phone calls with this lady because I can manage this. This is more in my wheelhouse. I don't really want to do those video sessions. I want to keep mom on the phone because that feels comfortable for me. And it may be really hard for me to hold both the kid and the mom if I'm doing video sessions with them together. So those are all some things that I might be thinking about in terms of reflective practice fidelity. In terms of emotional process fidelity, I think that's a good place to move to because it's really important to think about how regulated everyone was. Right before we started this training, somebody wrote that in the chat that was something that was important. Like regulation is key. That's foundational. So when we think about emotional process fidelity, I think for this mom, from what we know, it seems like her cup is really full. It seems like she is grieving the loss of the child's father. She's really worried about her own health. She's worried about how, if something happens to her, how that's going to affect her daughter. It may be really challenging without the video sessions to really assess how the child is feeling. But the mom has told us that she noticed that the child is pretty clingy. So I'm going to guess that the child's cup is pretty full too. Without the video, we can't really see ports of entry about how they express their emotions to one another and how they respond to one another. So that's kind of hard. But I'm wondering if by having these phone sessions with mom, she's allowed to express her feelings in a way that maybe she can't or doesn't feel comfortable in front of the child. So maybe these phone calls are really helping with emotional process fidelity. If mom can express herself, she can get more regulated, then maybe she can help her kid get more regulated. So maybe this is CPP, even though the kid's not there. So maybe even being on the phone without seeing the kid, we're really doing CPP. The next thing for this case that I want to think about is trauma framework fidelity. Oh, I forgot to advance the slide before. So trauma framework fidelity. So I think that's really important for this case. So mom has said that hearing about all the COVID deaths is really making her revisit her own grief about the child's father dying. And mom may need some individual support around that, some identifying triggers, ways to cope with those triggers as they happen. She may need to think about some strategies for that. um, Mom being triggered may affect her relationship with her daughter, who may also be triggered. um, they're both having a lot of worries. The child may really pick up on the mom's worries, and she may then think about her father's death and how her mom responded to that. Mom already mentioned that the child was clingy, so that could really be a port of entry in terms of exploring with the mom how she thinks COVID might be impacting her daughter. Um, it could also, in this situation, I think, be useful to think about CPP triangles, um, kind of new triangles or altered triangles. In terms of the mom, I think I might think about, you know, saying to mom, your child's dad, he only died 6 months ago. And it makes sense to me that all the news about people dying would make you think about him and think about your daughter losing another parent. It may be hard to think about anything else right now. But I hear that you're noticing that your daughter is being more clingy and that she needs you a bit more. I wonder if she's thinking about her dad too. Um, Another way to think about it might be, um, if you're thinking about the child, you're thinking about when your daddy died, and that makes you sad. Um, or to the mom, you're thinking about when her daddy died, and that makes you both sad. And so she wants to be close to you, and she's noticing that you're sad too. Again, these are just different ways to kind of connect their trauma history with what's going on now. In terms of content fidelity, there's lots of ports of entries here, right? Mom being worried about leaving her daughter an orphan, that's a port of entry. You might want to you could explore mom's own fears, her own possible trauma history. I think I might say something to mom like, Mom, it seems like you're worried about your daughter being alone if something were to happen to you. It can feel so lonely when someone you love dies. That kind of, to me, holds both of them in the moment. Another port of entry might be that kid when she was playing hide and seek, when you were having sessions together. Mom, I understand that you're worried that your daughter's not going to be able to sit still for a video. But I remember when we were all together in person and she would play hide and seek. I wonder if she could use play on the videos and we could understand a little better about what's going on for her. Again, not to convince mom, but just to kind of let her know that she's noticing things about her daughter and her daughter used play in the past and maybe we can use it again. In terms of the goals of treatment regarding content fidelity, there might need to be a shift in goals. Maybe regulation and helping them deal with what's going on with COVID might be where you're at right now. So that's case number one. I'm hoping that's helping people think about fidelity. I'm going to move us on to case number two. So again, I got to move you guys here so I can read this. So case number two, you are in the foundational phase of treatment with Melissa. Melissa's son, Christopher, who's 4 years old with some developmental delays, was sexually abused by a neighbor. When Christopher disclosed the abuse, Melissa called the police. Christopher was interviewed by Child Protective Services and had a victim-sensitive interview. You have never met Christopher in person or virtually, so all your foundational phase has been telehealth with mom, Melissa. You complete the assessment and do the feedback session with Melissa over the phone. You plan for a video introduction to CPP session with Christopher and Melissa. The intro session will be the first time that you meet or see Christopher. Okay, we are going to do a poll. and you guys are going to say what you think about, is this CPP? Is it not CPP? Maybe.
Tina, you have a question? Somebody's asked whether you've done a CROW.
No, I have not. I've never seen this kid video anything. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. Then I'm going to share it with you guys. So this time, more no's than last time, some maybes, and some yeses. Okay. Hang on one sec. I just got to move some things out of the way. Okay. So let's talk about this case, and let's start with procedural fidelity. I feel like that's a good place to start on this one. And maybe this is some of your no answers. So the therapist missed a step in the foundational phase, right? Like she didn't observe the dyad together. All right. So we don't know why she didn't do that. He or she, excuse me. I will say that most of these are based on experiences that for my own work or for vague references to things that colleagues have mentioned. So I may slip in and out of that. I may say she, because a lot of it may be what I've done. So maybe it wasn't possible for them to do a video because there wasn't a safe space for them to do it, or I don't know, maybe this therapist wants to think about whether to move to that introduction to CPP. The parent may feel awkward, right? The parent may not want to do it. I would want to know more about that, why they don't want to do that. Which I think all this leads us to thinking about reflective practice fidelity. What were the reasons the therapist skipped over that step in the procedures, right? Why is he or she not doing the observation? Is there some pressure to hurry up and move forward? Does it feel awkward to like watch a family interact on a video? And why does it feel awkward to do it on video, but maybe less awkward to do it in person? So again, I would want to reflect on that if I was the therapist. And is there some technology limitation, either on the therapist's part or on the family's part? So those are all things to think about. I think I would also, I don't think I put, sorry, I didn't put a bullet point on this one, but I'd also want to think a little bit about trauma framework fidelity. Christopher, this little kiddo, may be uncomfortable being on video with a person he's never met before, right? Like this therapist is totally new, and then they're going to pop up on a screen, probably in Christopher's house or where he stays. And he's had a history. Part of his trauma history is being interviewed by protective services, being talked to by the police. So just the therapist popping up on a video may feel kind of intrusive. And it may be helpful for this therapist to think about that and maybe slow things down. Maybe letting the mom know, like, I think I might need to know a little more about Christopher first before we move on to the next step. In terms of content fidelity, it might be really difficult to have a clear case formulation for this case if you haven't seen them together. I don't know about you guys, but a lot of sexual abuse cases that I work with, parents often have a real agenda about, let's talk about the abuse. And I want you, kiddo, to tell this therapist lady about everything that happened to you. So that's often a parent's agenda. But there may be lots of other things going on, like in terms of how the child expresses himself or what's their interactions like, that may be part of your CPP treatment and your CPP goals, but if you don't see them together, it's hard to do that. So if you don't have the observation, then it's really hard to I feel like, have a good case formulation, and maybe set all the appropriate goals. So I might say to mom in this case, Mom, I've been thinking about our plan to start the session with you and Christopher next week. I know you told me that he talked to several people like the police and he had a victim sensitive interview. And I'm wondering if it might make more sense for us to meet over video first, for me to just observe you and how you interact and what Christopher's like before we introduce him to the idea of therapy, and see what mom thinks about that. Does that make sense to people? Yes, no, nods, thumbs down.
Tina, you're getting some important comments. One is thinking about the cultural aspects of this case. What is the family's experience of therapy? What were the racial dynamics in play with the perpetrators, interviewers, CPS, and I imagine also the therapist?
Yes, thank you. Great. Those are great comments and great questions to think about. Absolutely. I know for myself that I often work with families who are a different race than me, and a lot of the people who may have talked to them or interviewed them or talked to them about hard stuff, maybe somebody who's a different race than them. So that's actually a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other comments, Chandra, that I should be aware of before I move on?
No, there's some that we might revisit at the end.
Okay. I'm going to move on to our next case. Case number 3. You are in the intervention phase of treatment with Monica, who's 5, and her father. Monica was left with a caregiver who locked her in a closet for several hours, unbeknownst to her father. During a telehealth session, Monica runs out of the room and you can hear her rummaging around. After about 5 minutes, she comes back with a long-haired Barbie. And she talks fast and tells the story of Rapunzel, or the movie Tangled, for the next 10 minutes, including that Rapunzel was locked in a tower and her real parents didn't know she was there. The father smiles and says she watches that movie a lot. You say it sounds scary to be locked in a tower. I wonder if she thought her parents would never find her. Father says, if I was Rapunzel's dad, I'd look everywhere until I found her. Monica smiles briefly, but then says that Rapunzel's parents took too long to find her. Okay. We're going to find out, if you guys think this is CPP. Yes, no, or maybe. Okay, a lot of yeses, a couple no's, and a couple more maybes. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Oh, you guys have to see it, sorry. So mostly yeses. Okay. So let's look at our fidelity tools. So my first question for this is, what's it like to be in the room with this family? All right. Especially when this kiddo is running around, rummaging around, looking for a toy. Then she takes 10 minutes and tells this long story about Rapunzel. How does it feel for you as a therapist when the dad makes the comment that he would look everywhere for Rapunzel, but the little girl says, took too long? I don't know about you, but I might feel a little stressed. I would think, am I doing this right? Are we using this story right? What is this about? Why can't she just stay put? I think I might feel a little pleased that dad was getting into the story. And I might even get a little frustrated with this little girl. Like, come on, cut your dad some slack. He's getting into the story. Like, give him a break. I think moving on to emotional process fidelity, I think with all those feelings I might be having, it might be hard for me to be a little more curious about and be present with this family. So I might not be as helpful as I wanted to be because I might be thinking about all these things. But so I might take a breath. I might need to regulate myself and my own emotions. I might take a breath and say, Dad, Monica, I'm gonna need a minute. I gotta try to understand what both of you are saying about Rapunzel. I think the therapist in here names some of the feelings. She talks about it being scary to be locked in a tower. Um, she she could have said something about Dad's feelings. I wonder if Rapunzel's parents were scared too. I wonder if they were scared they would never find her. Um, in terms of dyadic relational fidelity, um, it seems like this kiddo and this dad are really having a moment of connection. Dad is getting into this Rapunzel story. He said he would look everywhere until he found her. And I would just think, Dad's protecting her. Yay for Dad. But then Monica also seems to get it. She smiles at Dad, right? She's like kind of acknowledges him that he's getting into it. But then she says, oh, it took too long. She's letting him know this needs some repair. And the question I have is, how does this therapist use this moment? How does she use this port, or he use this port? Is there a way to acknowledge both of their agendas, help them understand each other better? Maybe the therapist could say something like, Dad, it sounds like if you were Rapunzel's dad, you would look and look and look until you found her. But even if you found her, she still might be upset that it took so long. Monica, can we hear a little more about what happens next in the story? So you're kind of acknowledging that they both have feelings about this. This story, and this actually something very similar happened to me in a session, reminded me a lot of Chandra's book, You Weren't With Me. And I feel like this is a real common theme with families, parents, and often therapists. I'll say for myself, we want to rush to the protecting part, that everything's going to be okay, kid. Now you're safe. And kids tell us, not so fast, grown-ups. I have some feelings about this first. And this story really presents a great port of entry for that. Also thinking about trauma framework fidelity, I think the therapist does a good job of kind of recognizing that there's a connection between the story and what happened to the child. This story that the child talks about Rapunzel is like a gift. It's perfect. It's a great metaphor. And I think the therapist is wise to use the story to help them express their feelings and experiences. The therapist, he or she, doesn't say, hey, this is just like what happened to you and when you got locked in a closet. The therapist really stays in the metaphor, which I think is useful. In terms of content fidelity, we've already mentioned ports of entry, and that the story is a way to kind of talk about, help them understand each other and help them express their feelings, which may be treatment goals. Looking at the time, we're gonna go on to the last case. You are in intervention stage of treatment with Samuel, who's 3, and his mom. Mom was in a violent relationship for several years, and Samuel witnessed his mother being hurt. Mom recently lost her job due to COVID closures. Samuel can no longer go to daycare. Samuel is very active. When you do telehealth sessions, he runs on and off the screen, and he's off the screen more than he's on. His mom says she doesn't think telehealth will work, and she's constantly telling him to sit down and look at the camera so you can see. You set up a game for them to play online during the sessions. Samuel engages in the sessions, and he and his mom play for the rest of the session. So, is this CPP? Yes or no? Oh, a lot more maybes this time, and a lot more no's. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. I know we're moving kind of quickly. And I'm going to share. This one seems to be dividing people a little more. All right. So, reflective practice fidelity. What's it like for the therapist, do you think, when the mom is telling the kid to sit still and to look at the camera And for this kid to be running around, I think it could really feel like you're not doing CPP, right? Um, in terms of reflection, I would think about why this game? Why would you want to set up a game? Are you worried that the kid's running around so much? You just want them to sit down. So a game is a way to do that. I think a lot of the work that we do, parents have goals of wanting their kids to behave or stop misbehaving in sessions. But children's behavior are ways that they're telling us things, and their behavior has meaning. In terms of emotional process fidelity, I want us to think about, how do we interpret this kid's energy, their affect? Are they being energetic? Are they being worried? Are they stressed out because mom's stressed out? Um, she clearly has a lot of worries. Um, a port of entry may be to really acknowledge mom's feelings. Mom, I know you have so much you're dealing with right now. I want therapy to be helpful, but I realize that you're pretty stressed right now. Um, we're still learning how to do this together. We're learning how to do this telehealth together. Um, in terms of dyadic relational fidelity, it seems like they're able to be together, right? They're able to do something together, which is good, this game. And maybe this game is regulating, helps this kiddo settle his body a little bit, um, and maybe helps mom. You know, your mom really wants you to sit down, but you're having a hard time keeping your body still. It seems like when you guys can play this game together, you can settle down and you can be close to each other. Um, in terms of the trauma framework fidelity, I would wonder about this family's history. Is mom's stress and her desire to have this kid sit down, is that related to any of their past history in terms of the violent relationship? Did she want the child to sit down and be still and be quiet to avoid any violent behavior? Was she told she wasn't a very effective parent by the violent partner? Um, is mom being triggered by all the stress? Is the kiddo being triggered by mom's stress, which can happen in violent relationships? And finally, in terms of content validity, um, how does this intervention fit into your goals of treatment? Maybe you're helping this kid settle, but is that really what you're trying to do in CPP? That may or may not be true. So the answer is any of this CPP? And I think it all depends. I know you guys have heard that a million times. Um, I think in order to answer that question, we really can use the tools to help us and guide us to be thinking more. We may not have a definite yes or no answer. It may be maybe, but I think the fidelity tools are a way to help us think about that and how we can apply CPP to what we're doing, or how it fits or it doesn't fit. So I know we don't have a lot of time for chat or questions. But Chandra, I don't know if there's anything that stuck out to you in the chat.
I think people are finding the case examples that you used really helpful. There are some questions related to when there's only a phone, and just thinking about how to start up, foundational phase, other things like that.
Yeah, and when people, well, again, you can't really answer, but when people say phone, I don't know if that means just a phone or if there's video phone.
I think they mean just audio.
Yeah. Um, you know, that's what people have. Um, so I feel like I want to say, yeah, oh, that's not ideal, but there's a lot of things that aren't ideal. I wish I could say, oh, do A, B, and C, and then it'll work. I don't know. I think it really depends on the family. I wonder about ways to focus first on how you can figure out what they're doing together. To me, I think when you're just on the phone, dyadic relational fidelity seems like to stick out for me. How can you figure out how to help them be together, or even assess what they're doing together and how they're interacting? So that's what comes to mind in terms of the fidelity tool. That's not a great answer, but that's what's coming to mind. Anything else that sticks out in the chat? I'm looking, but somebody, Lily wrote, meet them where they're at, or meet them where they are. Um,
There was a
like,
question before of doing some of the observations, in particular how to do a crawl and also how to set it up when they're in different places, when they're in two different locations.
yeah, I don't do the crawl. So I mean, I've done it, but I don't do it now as part of my assessment. Um, I think you'd have to work with the parent to figure out how you would how you would set up, like, what toys are there. You also might, again, this is just my idea, think about, can you enlist anyone else in the family to help with that? When they're in different locations, I'm going to say I'm not an expert on that. We are just starting, I am just personally starting to think about ways to do that when parents and kids are separated. I bet there's people on the call, and I bet there's trainers we might think about having a training about that. But we are just starting to do that. So I know next weekend or next week, I'm starting to do some observation, where the parents are going to set up the camera, and they're going to do something together. They're either going to, like, have a meal together or play or do something like that together, so I can get some idea of how they're interacting.
Can I jump in a little, Tina?
Please, yes.
I think one of the things that we might think about is what is our goal in doing it? So in CPP, we're really asking people to observe the way that they play together, and part is just so we get a sense of how they play, as well as so we can think about how might we think with a parent about that when we go into core intervention. And so that would be really important. When people are part of the court system, you may be using a structured observational procedure for a different reason. And what you really want to think about is, this is not observation as usual. How are we using it? Are we even able to use it in this way? And if not, does it make sense to do it? I think typically what you're looking at is, how does the caregiver and child play together? And then as the task kind of increases in its level of frustration, how do parents scaffold and support children? What happens to the relationship? The truth is, we're actually starting out from moment one with a high level of frustration, so I'm not sure. And it really depends on the dyad. So again, what your goals are, how you're going to use the information. If it's really more for your own process, I would think about how it's interesting that in a lot of other treatments, you teach the parents to do described. It's a very standard kind of component in parent-child interaction therapy, where you actually have them run a running narrative, like you're putting the blue block on the red block. You've got the car and you're driving it
Oh,
around. And so, realizing again that mantra to not let the perfect be the enemy of the possible, like we'd be like, okay, so how about if we do this and you're just basically going to be my eyes? And so just run a running tab, and I would know. And if you could describe what you're doing too. And it may seem a little loony, and the truth is, like, hey, maybe you and I'll have a good laugh about this.
yeah, Chandra, thanks. That's a really great idea. I hadn't thought about that at all. So it sounds like if you use it in a different model, you have some experience and that you've seen it work. So I think we have to be creative. It's not, there isn't, we're all going to find one way, or we're all going to find different ways to do it.
Great, Tina, you're getting lots of appreciations. Great webinar. People are really thanking you for your wisdom, reflection, and willingness to share vignettes and experiences.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you all for the work you're doing. I know it's hard work anyway, and this makes it extra super hard. But I think we're all learning something. I mean, I'm generally a very glass half empty kind of gal, but I do think that there are some positives. If somebody said, oh, you're going to learn how to do telehealth, I'd be like, no, I'm not. Never. I'm never going to do that. That's stupid. And, sometimes it works. Sometimes it's, like, kind of really interesting, and it's a new way to do it. So I appreciate all of your ideas and your creativity, and your patience with technology. So I hope that you go out and have a nice, relaxing weekend. And Chandra, thank you so much for all your help with this.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye, guys.
Oh, one other thing. Sorry. A little plug. Lily, can you unmute or put it in the chat and I can read it? Let me see if I can find you.
I can unmute. Hi, we're giving a little plug. Today is our final CPP free to providers yoga. We're doing it at 4 o'clock Central Time, so make adjustments for that. Bring your body and any props you have or may need, but it's all levels and everyone's welcome. And we are going to continue in June. We're going to do a donation based in June, and I'll be posting that on the provider site. Great job, Tina.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks, everybody. And we did record it. We'll work on the recording and get it. We'll let you know how to access it once we figure that out. Okay? All right. Thanks,
Yes,
guys.
We'll post about the recording and any kind of slides that Tina wants to share in the CPP provider group, as well as to everybody who registered for this talk.
Thank you. All right. Bye, guys.